When an 18-year-old was cast out by his stepmother, handed the deed to a worthless, derelict pump house in the middle of nowhere, he thought his life was over. But what he discovered, locked away inside its crumbling walls, wasn't just about the past. It was a map to a future he never knew he had. If you've ever felt lost or underestimated, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button and let's walk this road together. The front door clicked shut behind me with a sound like a bone snapping. It was a clean, final sound. For a moment, I just stood there on the concrete stoop, the thin fabric of my hoodie doing nothing against the damp March wind that whipped around the corner of the duplex. I had a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, heavy with the few clothes and books that were mine, and a folded piece of paper in my hand. It was my 18th birthday. Brenda, my stepmother, had been counting down the days with the kind of grim satisfaction usually reserved for a prison sentence ending. This morning, she'd woken me up not with a happy birthday, but with a mug of lukewarm coffee and an ultimatum. "You're an adult now, Leo," she'd said, her voice flat, avoiding my eyes as she stared out the kitchen window at the gray, weeping sky. "Your father's Social Security payments stopped today. You can't stay here anymore." It wasn't a negotiation. It was an eviction notice delivered over breakfast. She'd pushed the folded paper across the table. "This is what he left you. It's all that's left. The lawyer sent it over." I didn't have to ask what it was. For 2 years, since Dad died, she'd made it clear that I was a burden, a temporary financial asset that had just expired. The house was hers. The car was hers. The pittance in their joint savings account was hers. I was just a ghost, haunting the edges of her new life, a reminder of a man she seemed eager to forget. I unfolded the paper now, my fingers numb with cold. It was a deed, a quitclaim deed, the header said in severe, blocky letters. It transferred ownership of a property described in a string of impenetrable legal jargon, ending with the only words that made any sense. Commonly known as the old pump house on Lot 7, Ridge Road, Havenwood County. I remember Dad mentioning it once, years ago, a throwaway line about a piece of land his own father had bought for next to nothing. A place with a busted well and a brick shed to house the pump. He'd called it his fortress of solitude, laughing in that way he had, a deep rumble that made you feel safe. Brenda had scoffed. "A pile of bricks in a swamp," she'd called it. Utterly worthless. And now it was mine. My inheritance. A pile of bricks in a swamp. She'd given me $50 from her purse. "For the bus," she'd said, as if she were doing me a great favor, and pointed to the door. And just like that, 16 years of my life in that house, the only home I'd ever really known, were over. The click of the lock was the period at the end of the sentence. I stood on the stoop, the wind biting at my cheeks, and felt a hollowness so vast it threatened to swallow me whole. It wasn't just a house I'd lost. It was the last frayed thread connecting me to him, to my father. I was officially, legally, an adult, and I had never felt more like a child. The bus station was a sad, fluorescent-lit box that smelled of disinfectant and despair. I bought a ticket to a town called Oakhaven, the closest stop to a place that didn't even seem to be on the map. The man behind the scratched plexiglass shield looked at the address on the deed, squinted, and grunted. "Ridge Road. That's about 12 miles out of town. Nothing out there but trees and mud this time of year. You got someone picking you up?" I shook my head, my throat too tight to speak. "Good luck, kid," he said, sliding the ticket and my change under the glass. It wasn't a kind sentiment. It was a dismissal. The bus ride was 6 hours of watching the world blur past the grimy window. Cityscapes gave way to suburbs, then to sprawling farmland, brown and dormant under the oppressive gray sky. The few other passengers were silent, lost in their own worlds of cheap headphones and tired thoughts. I leaned my head against the vibrating glass and let the numbness take over. It was easier than thinking, easier than feeling the sharp edges of grief and fear. Dad. The thought of him was a physical ache in my chest. He would have been so angry. He would have never let this happen. But he was gone. A sudden heart attack 2 years ago had turned my world inside out, leaving me in the care of a woman who had only ever seen me as part of a package deal she no longer wanted. I tried to remember his laugh, the calloused feel of his hand when he'd ruffle my hair, the smell of sawdust that always clung to his clothes. He was a carpenter, a man who built things, who made broken things whole again. He could fix anything, a wobbly chair, a leaky faucet, a bad day. But he couldn't fix his own heart, and he couldn't fix this. The memories were becoming blurry, like old photographs left out in the sun. It scared me. It felt like I was losing him all over again, bit by bit. The bus finally wheezed to a stop in Oak Haven. The town was little more than a wide spot in the road, a gas station, a diner with a flickering neon sign, a general store, and a handful of houses with peeling paint. The air here was different. It smelled of wet earth and wood smoke, clean and cold. My duffel bag felt heavier now. My $50, now $26 after the bus ticket, felt impossibly small. I asked the woman behind the counter at the general store for directions to Ridge Road. She was older, with kind, crinkling eyes and a faded floral apron. She gave me the same look as the man at the bus station, a mixture of pity and curiosity. "Honey, that's a long walk," she said, her voice raspy. "And the road's not paved all the way. It gets real bad after the rain we've had." She pointed east. "Follow this main road for about 3 miles. You'll see the turnoff. It's an old logging trail mostly. What's out there for you?" I mumbled something about family property. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. What family? My family was a ghost, and the woman who wore his ring had just thrown me away. The walk was brutal. The asphalt quickly turned to gravel, and the gravel turned to a muddy track swallowed by dense, dripping pines. The sky, if possible, grew darker. A cold rain started to fall. Not a downpour, but a persistent, miserable drizzle that soaked through my hoodie and chilled me to the bone. Every step was a struggle, my sneakers sinking into the muck. The silence was absolute, broken only by the drip of water from the trees and the squelch of my own feet. I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. Doubt began to creep in, a cold, insidious vine wrapping around my heart. What was I doing? I was walking to a ruin, a joke of an inheritance, with no plan, no money, and no one in the world who cared where I was. Maybe Brenda was right. Maybe it was worthless. Maybe I was worthless. A part of me wanted to turn back, but there was nothing to turn back to. The click of that door had been a wall built behind me. The only way was forward. After what felt like an eternity, the trees thinned, and I saw it. A rusted chain-link fence, sagging between listing wooden posts, choked with weeds and thorny vines. A small, hand-painted sign, barely legible, hung from one of the posts. Ridge Road. This was it. I followed the fence line, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. The property was a mess. Overgrown with a decade of neglect, it was a wild tangle of briars, saplings, and weeds. And in the middle of it all, almost completely swallowed by the wilderness, was a small, squat building. It was made of dark red brick, streaked with green moss and grime. Its roof was a patchwork of rusted tin and missing shingles. A single, grimy window stared out like a blind eye. The pump house. It was smaller and sadder than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't a pile of bricks in a swamp. It was a tombstone. My first feeling was a wave of despair so profound it almost buckled my knees. This was my legacy. This was all he'd left me. A crumbling shed on a forgotten patch of mud. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to kick something until it broke. But I was too tired, too cold, too empty. I pushed through a gap in the fence and trudged across the sodden ground. The door was thick, solid wood, swollen in its frame, with a heavy, rusted padlock. Of course, locked. A final, cosmic joke. I slumped against the cold, damp brick, the rain plastering my hair to my forehead. This was it, the end of the line. I was 18 years old, homeless, and my only possession in the world was a locked shed I couldn't even get into. I slid down the wall and sat in the mud, my duffel bag in my lap, and for the first time since the door of my old life clicked shut, I let myself cry. I cried for my father, for the gaping hole he'd left in my life. I cried for my own stupidity, for walking 12 miles through the rain to a place like this. And I cried for the terrifying, crushing weight of being completely and utterly alone. The tears were hot on my cold cheeks, a useless, pathetic release. After a while, the sobs subsided, leaving behind a hollow, aching exhaustion. I sat there, shivering, as the daylight began to fade. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit here and freeze. My eyes scanned the area around the pump house, looking for anything, a rock, a heavy branch, something to break the lock. My gaze fell on a pile of rotting lumber and debris near the back of the building. It looked like the remains of an old lean-to. Poking out from under a sheet of corrugated tin was the rusted head of an old pry bar. Hope, a tiny, flickering ember, sparked in my chest. I scrambled over, my hands clumsy with cold, and pulled it free. It was heavy, solid. I took it back to the door. The lock was old and corroded. I wedged the tip of the pry bar into the hasp and threw all my weight against it. The metal groaned in protest. I did it again, grunting with the effort, my muscles screaming. On the third try, there was a loud crack, and the rusted metal shrieked and tore apart. The lock fell to the ground with a thud. The door was still stuck fast, swollen with years of damp. I had to use my shoulder, ramming it again and again until it finally gave way with a shuddering groan, scraping against the concrete floor inside. The air that billowed out was thick and musty, the smell of trapped time, of dust and decay, and something vaguely metallic. I stood in the doorway, peering into the gloom, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I had no idea what I was looking for. I just knew I couldn't stay out in the rain. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside. The interior was small, no bigger than a single-car garage. The last of the day's gray light filtered through the filthy window, illuminating a scene of profound neglect. In the center of the concrete floor was a massive, ancient-looking piece of machinery, the pump. It was a hulking beast of cast iron and corroded brass fittings, bolted to the floor, silent and still. A thick layer of dust and cobwebs covered everything like a funeral shroud. Along one wall was a crude wooden workbench, littered with old tools, rusted cans, and brittle, yellowed newspapers. The place was a time capsule. It felt like someone had walked out 50 years ago and never come back. I dropped my bag on the floor and ran a hand over the cold, greasy metal of the pump. It was a relic from another era. This was what my father had left me, a monument to uselessness. I felt a fresh wave of bitterness. Why? Why this? Why not something that could help me? Something that could give me a start? It felt like a cruel punchline to a joke I didn't understand. My teeth were chattering now, the cold having settled deep into my bones. I needed to find a dry place to sleep, to get out of these wet clothes. I rummaged through my duffel bag and pulled out my one dry sweatshirt. As I was changing, my eyes scanned the small space again, more carefully this time. I was looking for anything. A blanket, a box of matches, anything useful. My gaze settled on the workbench. It was cluttered and chaotic. But underneath, in the deep shadows, I saw the corner of something. A box. It wasn't a cardboard box. It was dark wood with metal clasps on the front. It looked old, but it was clean, too clean for this place. The dust around it was disturbed. Someone had put it there more recently than 50 years ago. My curiosity piqued. I knelt down and pulled it out. It was a military-style footlocker, heavy and solid. It wasn't locked. My fingers trembled as I undid the two metal latches. They sprang open with a sharp, metallic snap that echoed in the small, silent space. I lifted the lid. The inside was lined with what looked like felt, and it was packed with items, arranged neatly. On the very top was a large, sealed manila envelope. My name was written on it in my father's familiar, slightly messy handwriting. Leo. Just my name. My breath caught in my throat. My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. This wasn't a random piece of junk. This was for me. He had left this here, for me. With shaking hands, I lifted the envelope out. It was thick, heavy. I tore it open. Inside were several folded documents, a small, leather-bound journal, and another, smaller envelope. I opened the smaller envelope first. Inside was a key, a simple brass house key, and a single, folded piece of paper. I unfolded it. It was a letter. From him. "My dearest Leo," it began. The moment I saw the words, the dam inside me broke again. But this time it wasn't a flood of despair. It was grief, pure and sharp, a longing so intense it felt like a physical blow. I had to sit down on the dusty floor, my back against the cold iron of the pump, and just breathe for a minute before I could continue reading. The letter was long, several pages filled with his handwriting. "If you are reading this, then it means I'm gone. And it probably means Brenda has finally shown her true colors. I'm sorry, son. I'm so sorry for that. I know this must be your 18th birthday, and this is not how I ever wanted you to spend it. I want you to know, first and foremost, that I love you more than anything in this world. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and not a day went by that I wasn't proud to be your father." I had to stop, wiping my eyes with the back of my dirty hand. His voice was so clear in my head, it was like he was sitting right there next to me in the dark. I could almost hear the low, steady cadence of his speech. "I need to explain some things," the letter continued. "Things I should have told you when I was alive. I wasn't a brave enough man to do it then, and I will regret that for whatever time comes next. Your mother, your real mother, she passed away when you were just a baby. I know you know that. What you don't know is that she was a wonderful, brilliant woman, and she left us well provided for. There was life insurance, a significant amount. Money I invested and grew over the years, for you. For your future. For college, for a home, for whatever you wanted to be." I stared at the words, my mind struggling to process them. Money? A significant amount? I had spent the last 2 years living on scraps, watching Brenda complain about every dollar, every expense related to me. "When I met Brenda," he wrote, "I was lonely, and you were a little boy who needed a mother. I thought she was the answer. For a while, she was. But after we got married, things changed. She started seeing the money not as your future, but as ours. As hers. We fought about it. A lot. It was the one thing, the only thing, that I would never bend on. That money was sacred. It was your mother's legacy to you. I knew, deep down, that if anything ever happened to me, she wouldn't honor that. She would find a way to take it, to absorb it into her own life and leave you with nothing. She'd call it taking care of you, but it would be gone. So I did something drastic. I started moving the money, slowly, over years, converting it to cash, to other assets she couldn't trace. I hid it. For you. I looked around the filthy, crumbling pump house. He hid it? Here? It seemed impossible. This property, the letter went on, this worthless pile of bricks, was my secret. My father left it to me, and its title was so old and obscure it never got rolled into my other assets. Brenda never knew I still owned it outright. It was my safe deposit box, the one place I knew would be overlooked. She thinks it's a joke, a liability. She'll have been happy to sign it over, just to be rid of the tax burden. That was the plan. It was always the plan. My head was spinning. The narrative of my life, the one where my father had died and left me a penniless burden, was cracking apart. He hadn't abandoned me. He hadn't left me with nothing. He had been protecting me, even from beyond the grave. It was a plan so complex, so full of foresight, and a deep, painful mistrust of his own wife. It was a testament to his love. I know this is a lot to take in, he wrote, and I'm leaving you with a mess, a burden that no 18-year-old should have to carry. But I trust you, Leo. I always have. You have a good heart, and you're stronger than you think. You get that from your mother. Inside this box, you'll find everything you need to start. There's a journal with instructions, account numbers for things she doesn't know about, and contact information for a man named Arthur Vance. He's a lawyer, an old friend. He knows everything. He will help you. The key is for a storage unit in Oak Haven. More things are there. But the most important thing is here, with you, in this pump house. I looked at the letter, then at the box. He was telling me there was more. Here, right now. I built a false bottom under the old workbench, the letter concluded. The wood is newer than the rest. You'll see it if you look. Be careful. And be smart. Don't trust anyone until you've spoken to Arthur. Don't go back to Brenda. Your new life starts here, Leo. In this pile of bricks. It's not a tombstone, son. It's a foundation. Build something good on it. I love you. Always. Dad. The letter fell from my hands. I sat there in the near-total darkness, the only light a pale sliver from the grimy window, and a profound, earth-shaking shift happened inside me. The fear and despair that had been my constant companions for 2 years, that had ridden me hard on the long walk here, began to recede. In their place, a fierce, burning love for my father ignited, a love mixed with an almost unbearable grief for all the things he'd carried alone. He had seen this coming. He had planned for it. He had spent years of his life creating a safety net for me, a secret ark to carry me through the flood he knew was coming. The pump house wasn't a worthless joke. It was a promise. It was the final, desperate act of a father's love. My shivering had stopped. A different kind of energy was coursing through me now. Purpose. I fumbled for my phone, its screen a blinding glare in the dark. The battery was at 15%. I turned on the flashlight and aimed it at the workbench. I knelt down, my heart hammering, and looked underneath. Just as he'd said, one section of the dusty floorboards beneath the bench looked different. The wood was a slightly lighter color, the nails less rusted. It was expertly done. I never would have noticed it. I used the pry bar again, this time with a surgeon's care, wedging the tip into a thin seam and gently levering it up. The board creaked and lifted. And underneath, in the hollow space, was a small, metal fireproof safe. This is the point in the story where everything could have gone a different way. I could have taken whatever was in that safe and just run. Run away from the memories, from the responsibility, from this cold, dark place. And honestly, if you've ever been in a situation where you felt like you had nothing, where survival was the only thing on your mind, you know how tempting that is. The easy way out always looks so good from the bottom. If you're at a crossroads like that in your life right now, Or if you've been there before, let me know in the comments. You're not alone in that feeling. This community is for people who get it, who have had to make the hard choices. So stick with me, and let's get back to what was in that safe. I dragged the safe out. It was heavy. It wasn't locked with a key, but with a combination dial. My heart sank. A combination? He didn't write it in the letter. I scrambled for the journal, my hands shaking again. I flipped it open. The first page had a date on it, my 5th birthday, and below it a 6-digit number, July 14th, 2004. My birth date, of course. It was always about me. I knelt in front of the safe, the beam of my phone's flashlight trembling in my hand, and slowly, carefully, I turned the dial. Right, left, right. With a solid, satisfying clunk, the mechanism disengaged. I pulled the handle, and the heavy door swung open. I don't know what I was expecting. Gold bars, maybe, jewels, something out of a movie. The reality was both more mundane and more incredible. The safe was filled with cash, bundles of it, neatly wrapped in paper bands, stacks of hundreds and fifties. I pulled one out. The band said $5,000. There were at least 20 bundles. I did the math in my head, my brain struggling to catch up with my eyes. It was $100,000. Minimum. Tucked beside the cash were more documents in waterproof bags. A birth certificate, a social security card, and a properly executed last will and testament, notarized and signed, naming Arthur Vance as the executor. It was a legal document that clearly and unequivocally left everything, including the funds he had secreted away, to me, his only son, Leo Carter. The will explicitly stated that his wife, Brenda Carter, had been provided for separately through the house and a life insurance policy in her name, and was to have no claim on these assets. He had thought of everything. He had legally firewalled me from her. He had given me the one thing she had taken away: power. The power to choose. The power to be safe. I sat back on my heels, the beam of light illuminating the incredible contents of the safe, and I started to laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh, not really. It was a wild, unhinged sound, full of grief and relief and a touch of madness. It echoed off the brick walls of the pump house, my inheritance, my fortress, my foundation. The first thing I did was close the safe, put the floorboard back in place, and slide the footlocker on top of it. Even with the truth laid bare, the instinct to hide, to protect, was overwhelming. My phone was almost dead. I needed to get back to town, find a place to stay for the night, and call that lawyer. The $50 Brenda had given me felt like a joke now, but it was still the only accessible money I had. I pulled out a single bundle of cash from the safe, $5,000. I peeled off $200 bills and tucked them into my pocket, feeling the illicit thrill of it. I put the bundle back, closed everything up, and made it look as undisturbed as possible. Then, I shouldered my duffel bag, which now felt ridiculously light, and stepped back out into the cold, damp night. The rain had stopped. The clouds had parted just enough for a few stars to pierce the darkness. The walk back to town didn't feel as long. The mud didn't seem as deep. Something inside me had shifted. The world hadn't changed, but I had. I was no longer a victim of circumstance. I was the keeper of a promise. I was my father's son. I found a small, cheap motel on the edge of Oakhaven. The room was shabby, with a threadbare carpet and a humming air conditioner. But the bed was clean and the shower had hot water. After washing away the grime of the road, I sat on the edge of the bed and plugged in my phone. As it charged, I read my father's letter again, and then I opened the journal. It wasn't just a list of instructions, it was a conversation. Years of it. He had written entries to me, sometimes weekly, sometimes monthly. He wrote about his day, about a project he was working on, about a memory of me as a kid. He wrote about his fears for my future, his frustrations with Brenda, his deep, abiding love for me. It was his way of staying with me, of giving me the guidance he was afraid he wouldn't be there to give in person. It was the most painful, beautiful thing I had ever read. The next morning, with a charged phone and a clear head, I called the number for Arthur Vance. A calm, professional voice answered. Vance and Associates. I asked for him, my voice cracking slightly. May I ask who's calling? The receptionist asked. My name is Leo Carter, I said. My father was a client. His name was Michael Carter. There was a pause, and then the receptionist said, One moment, please. A few seconds later, a man's voice, warm and steady, came on the line. Mr. Carter? This is Arthur Vance. I've been expecting your call. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. You have? Your father was a very meticulous man, Arthur said gently. He set up a trust with my office and left very specific instructions. They were to be enacted upon your 18th birthday or upon you contacting me, whichever came later. I take it you've been to the property? Yes, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I found the box, the letter. Good, he said. That was the first step. Michael, your father, he wanted to be sure you were the one to find it. He wanted you to hear it from him first. Now, Leo, the most important thing is for you to not panic. You are not alone in this. We need to meet. Can you get to my office? It's in the city, about 2 hours from you. We made an appointment for the following day. He gave me instructions, told me to take a cab, and his office would cover it. Before we hung up, he said something that stuck with me. Your father was a good man, Leo. A very good man. He loved you more than anything. Everything he did to protect you. When I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of calm settle over me for the first time in years. I had an ally. My father had made sure of it. The meeting with Arthur Vance solidified everything. His office was in a tall, glass building that scraped the sky, a world away from the pump house. He was an older man, with gray hair, and the same kind of reassuring calm in person as he had on the phone. He sat me down, offered me a coffee, and treated me not like a kid, but like a client. He walked me through the legalities. The will was ironclad. The trust was perfectly structured. In addition to the cash I'd found, there were investments, managed accounts that Brenda had no idea existed. The total value was staggering. It was more money than I could comprehend. It was enough for a lifetime. Your father's instructions were clear, Arthur explained. The money is to be used for your education and well-being. He wanted you to have every opportunity he couldn't. He also left a provision regarding the property, the pump house. He slid a document across the polished mahogany desk. He established a separate fund, specifically for the reclamation and development of that land. He had a vision for it. He showed me sketches, plans my father had drawn himself in his precise architectural hand. He had wanted to build a small, self-sufficient homestead there. A workshop for himself, a garden, a small modern cabin. It wasn't just a hiding place, it was a dream. A dream he was passing on to me. I looked at the drawings, at the notes he'd made in the margins. It was a plan for a life. A quiet, meaningful life built with his own hands. And he had left me not just the dream, but the means to achieve it. Suddenly, my choice was clear. I could take the money and go anywhere, do anything. I could go to college, travel the world, disappear, and start over. Or I could stay. I could take this broken down piece of land and this crumbling brick shed and build my father's dream. I could build a home. I want to do it, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I want to build it. Arthur Vance smiled, a genuine, warm smile. I thought you might, he said. Your father would be very proud. The next few months were a blur of activity. Arthur helped me set up a proper bank account, get a driver's license, and buy a used, reliable truck. I moved out of the motel and rented a small apartment in Oak Haven. It felt strange to be paying bills, buying groceries, making my own decisions. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Every day, I drove out to the property. The first task was just clearing the land. I bought a chainsaw, a brush hog, and heavy-duty gloves. It was back-breaking work. I spent weeks cutting back the thorny vines, felling the saplings that crowded the pump house, and hauling away years of debris. I was sore and exhausted every night, but it was a good kind of tired. I was building something, even if all I was doing was tearing down the neglect. Slowly, painstakingly, the land began to breathe again. I uncovered old stone walls, a forgotten path to a small stream, and the original concrete slab where a barn must have once stood. As I worked, I felt closer to my father than ever before. I read from his journal every night, his words of encouragement and practical advice guiding me. "Measure twice, cut once," one entry read. "Don't be afraid to ask for help," said another. "Patience, Leo. Good things take time to build." The pump house itself was my main focus. I didn't want to tear it down. It was the heart of the whole thing. I started by cleaning it out, sweeping away the decades of dust and grime. I scrubbed the floors, washed the single window until it gleamed, and repaired the roof with new tin. I found an old electrician in town who helped me run new wiring, and a plumber who was fascinated by the old pump. He told me the well it was connected to was deep and tapped into a pure aquifer. With a new motor, he said, it would provide all the water I could ever need. The pump house was no longer a dark, forgotten space. I put in new lights, a small wood stove for heat, and kept the old workbench, sanding it down and refinishing it until the grain of the old wood shone through. It became my base of operations, my workshop, my sanctuary. It was the first place that had ever felt truly mine. I didn't hear from Brenda, and I didn't reach out. Arthur's office had sent her a formal notification of the execution of my father's will, along with a cease and desist letter to prevent any contact. I tried not to think about her, but sometimes, late at night, I would wonder what she thought when she learned the truth. Did she feel guilt? Anger? Or just the bitterness of being outsmarted? I realized it didn't matter. My energy was better spent on building my future, not dwelling on the person who had tried to take it from me. I started to meet people in Oak Haven. The woman at the general store, whose name was Martha, started saving the day-old newspapers for me. A man named Bill, who ran the local lumber yard, gave me a discount on materials after hearing what I was doing. They were small gestures, but they meant the world. They were threads of connection, weaving me into the fabric of a community. I wasn't just the strange kid who had inherited the old pump house anymore. I was Leo. One day, a truck pulled up my long, newly cleared driveway. An older man with a weathered face and kind eyes got out. "You Leo Carter?" he asked. I nodded, wary. "I'm your neighbor," he said, gesturing to the property through the trees. "Name's George. I knew your grandfather. And I knew your dad when he was just a boy, coming out here with him. Haven't seen anyone work this land in 30 years. Your father would be proud of what you're doing here, son." He stayed for an hour, telling me stories about my family, about the history of the land. When he left, the place felt different. It wasn't just my father's dream anymore. It was my history. It was my home. A year passed. The land was transformed. Where there was once a wild tangle of weeds, there was now a cleared field, a thriving vegetable garden, and the foundation for a small cabin, just like the one in my father's drawings. The pump house stood at the center of it all, clean and solid, a brick anchor in my new life. I had enrolled in online courses at the local community college, studying construction management and sustainable agriculture. I was learning, growing, building. I wasn't just following my father's plans anymore. I was adding my own. I wasn't the same scared, lost kid who had arrived in Oak Haven with nothing but a duffel bag and a worthless deed. I had found so much more than money inside that pump house. I had found my father's love, a legacy of resilience, and a strength in myself I never knew I possessed. I had learned that a home isn't just four walls and a roof. It's a place you build, a place you fight for, a place you pour your heart into. It's a foundation. Standing on the porch of my nearly finished cabin, looking out over the land as the sun set, I often think about the twists and turns that brought me here. I think about that cold, rainy day, the click of the lock, and the crushing feeling of being alone. It's easy to see moments like that as endings. But sometimes, the most painful endings are just the beginning of a story you haven't learned how to read yet. My father gave me a map, but I had to walk the path myself. I had to swing the axe, dig the foundation, and learn to build a life out of the pieces I was given. The inheritance wasn't the money, not really. It was the choice, the chance to build something good. And that's a lesson that stays with you. It's the kind of truth that, once you learn it, you can build anything on. This journey taught me that what seems worthless on the surface can hold the greatest value. It taught me that you can find your future by digging through the past. And most of all, it taught me that you are stronger than your circumstances. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to build a new life from the ground up, or find treasure in a place everyone else overlooked, please share your experience in the comments below. Reading your stories, knowing we're all on this journey of building and rebuilding, means the world. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe, because we all have a story worth telling.